My first exposure to the concept of queer people, at least the first that I remember, happened when I was 8 years old. A family member and I were coming home late from a family gathering. It was relatively warm out. You could hear the crickets and frogs that like to jump around the night in my neighborhood. Stars were out. Moon was a beautiful crescent. A nice summer night. As we were walking into the house, however, they said to me one sharp statement that will stick with me forever, that broke through the silence and peace of the night. Son, I don't care what kind of girl you like, but do not ever bring a boy home to us. This is a video about queerphobia in the Black community. Before we get into the meat of the video, I feel like I should say this. This video deals with queerphobia in the Black community, like I stated earlier, and as such is going to be a relatively serious video with extremely heavy themes and content. I do plan to do lighter videos in the future. My next one is going to be about funny stories from working retail, for example. Keep an eye out for that one. It should be out in about 2 weeks' time, if I can keep my time schedule worked out. But keep in mind, this is going to be one of the silly ones. Trigger warning will be at the top right of the screen, and I'll play this sound when they come up for you non-visual watchers. Under the trigger warning, I'll also put a timestamp to skip to and the reason for the warning. On top of that, sources that come up will be cited at the bottom right of the video and in the description too. If this video gets too heavy for you, feel free to leave. It's your right to do so, and I'd rather you protect your health than watch my sorry ass video. Now that that's been said, I'll start the video proper. Let's get the fun stuff out of fuck. Damn it. Let's get the heavy stuff out of the way first, in the most fun way possible, talking about statistics. High acceptance rates of queer people in the US are extremely recent, with rates of acceptance rising dramatically over the past decade. However, this isn't to say that we are out of the woods yet in concern to general queerphobia across the United States. There has been a rise in transphobic rhetoric and violence across the country, for example, on top of the potential for the Supreme Court to backslide on the OBGYN decision for the gays, which won us gay marriage back in 2015. Which are issues coupled with general holdouts to social change that queer relationships and open queer existence has brought. This video is specifically going to focus on the Black community's ongoing queerphobia and how it's damaging to countless Black queer folk in our community. Whilst acceptance of queer people has gone up across the board in terms of race, a Pew Research survey from October 2017 found that Black Americans do still lag behind white Americans, who have the second highest support, and Latina groups, who have the highest support for acceptance of homosexuality in particular. On a side note, I recolored the graph because Pew Research thought it would be a good idea to make these basically the same color in the original, so I edited the colors to make them a little easier to differentiate. Links in the description to the survey, of course, just thought y'all should know that moving forward. This displays that the Black community is, as far as the statistics say, considerably more homophobic than white and Latina communities, with a 10-point disparity between the Black and Latina community, while there is only a 3-point disparity between the Latina and white community. To give more context to this comparison, whilst there is a 3-point difference between the white and Latina community, who are the closest to each other in terms of these statistics, the point difference between the white and Black community is 7 points, with the white community being the one that is closest to the Black community when looking at this particular graph. Community, can't get enough of the word community. This disparity also appears in hate crimes against queer people, specifically transgender people, so massive trigger warning for this next part. When looking at hate crime rates against transgender people, the group that is typically targeted most are transgender women of color, with 49% of Latina trans women and 47% of black trans women reporting having experienced battery with a weapon due to their gender identity. Of 88 anti-queer homicides reported between 2012 and 2015 across 12 states, trans women in general made up 47 of the 88 cases. When you take into consideration the race of said trans women, black trans women made up 39 of the 88 total cases against queer people, and 39 of the 47 cases of trans women being murdered. This means that of the homicide cases that targeted trans women, black women made up 82% of the cases documented in this study. As well as this, these numbers may be higher than the data actually states. There may be a reporting bias among police that would cause them to underreport murders against trans women, and trans women of color and specifically, choosing to misgender these women and affecting the crime statistics as a result. The number of homicides against black trans women could very well be significantly higher than the numbers I'm showing you now. If you skipped the previous section, welcome back. Now we're going to be moving on to the next segment of the video, which will concern some certain inconsistencies in queerphobia in the black community, and speaking on one very famous singer-songwriter who inhabited our community, Prince. Yesterday, at least relative to the day that I wrote this, I was in the car with a family member of mine, driving home from getting a haircut, the same family member from the beginning story. Before we move further into this story, I should say that this family member really enjoys Prince's music. Like, really enjoys Prince's music. Please keep this in mind. I accidentally said princess music, I meant to say princes. Regardless, they had taken the aux cord, yes I say aux cord, and started playing videos by some guy they listen to who talks about issues in the black community. Most of this amounts to vaccine misinformation. The man in the video spoke on the Nicki Minaj situation with the swollen balls, calling black people who disagree with him coons and Sambo motherfuckers, and calling anything remotely queer corny. Editor's note, I did later find out that this radio host was, as far as I can tell, fucking Tariq Nasheed. But that's besides the point. This particular episode had a focus on Lil Nas X, who we stan, and his promotion of his recent album, Montero. And the man in the video started ranting about how there was some massive Hollywood conspiracy to turn black men effeminate to make us weaker, and that Lil Nas X, it was an industry plant to service this, and that anything remotely queer is an attack on yada yada yada, your usual fascist conspiracy shit. I should actually do a video on black fascism one day. That would be good. Anyways, this prompted the family member next to me to go on a rant about the conspiracy they had bought into, eventually bringing up Russell Westbrook, who recently wore a dress in order to support this dubious claim. Westbrook's mention, however, led to a really insightful for me and jarring as fuck for them conversation between the two of us. With my hand on the wheel, I said to the family member who, keep in mind, really enjoys this artist's music, what about Prince? Prince dressed pretty out there for his time. My family member remained silent at this remark and had clearly never put two and two together, both the conspiracy they believed in and the music artists they enjoyed, but they eventually gave a very half-baked, panicked response. Well, Prince never wore a dress like Westbrook did. I shot back with this. My face was extremely calm, even though I was panicking like a motherfucker inside. Yeah, but Prince dressed pretty woman-like with the makeup, the high heels, and the women's clothing. I mean, you can't say that he didn't. It was one of the things that he was known for. My family member, once again, didn't have a proper response to that. So they moved on to an extreme level of panicked damage control. Now, you know I don't have a single ounce of gay in my body, he said, clearly panicking by me bringing up this pretty obvious hypocrisy and general oversight in his thought process. But I gotta admit, Prince was a very pretty man, and he owned it. I used to look at him and go like, fucking damn man, why the fuck are you so pretty? It used to piss me the fuck off. And so I tied it back into this massive conspiracy to make black men womanly by saying this. And you can't really say that Prince was an industry plant. I mean, he was kicked out of the industry for a point in time. He went by the artist formerly known as Prince for a good while. He had very public beef with the industry and the Hollywood elite. Some people just like dressing like that, I guess. Further silence from that family member before quickly pivoting to a different conversation topic. We pulled up to our house less than 5 minutes later, with me pulling off after I dropped him off, because I had to pick up some things and they needed sleep because they had worked third shift the night before. Now, what I did in that conversation was admittedly dirty as fuck. Prince's music carries such a significant meaning to this family member due to the correlation between Prince and the death of my grandfather, who was this family member's father. Around the time of my grandfather's death, my father, who was the person I've been referencing as a family member this entire time, listened to Prince's music a lot and drew a very deep emotional connection to his music due to that, and to this day will say that Purple Rain by Prince is his favorite song, and that Prince is one of his favorite artists. This emotional connection to Prince's music is a benefit to me, being a queer child of a man who holds pretty homophobic viewpoints. Because even though it is an admittedly horrible move, and I felt fucking horrible doing it, I get to use Prince as a constant figure to push against my father's queerphobia. Even though, as far as we know, Prince wasn't queer, you can't deny that Prince wasn't at least the stereotype of a gay man that many homophobes hold. I mean, take a look at the guy. As well as that, due to Prince's very open industry troubles, you can't really say that Prince was an industry plant meant to make black men and kids gay. As stated earlier, in my situation, the ability to use Prince as a constant figure, a sort of beacon to move the discussion around, is really useful. In that conversation, I silently put two positions in the air, one being, well, fucking reasonable, and the other being extreme, to see which one my father would take. Position A: admit that some men, and some black men, just want to dress in an effeminate way, and that doesn't make them deviant or an industry plant or part of some conspiracy to fuck us over. This would work to invalidate the talking points of the person he was listening to in the car, and actually make him think instead of going off on what some ass-hurt homophobe YouTuber wanted him to think. Have him finally recognize an inconsistency in his thought. Or, position B: commit to the idea that there is a conspiracy to make black men more effeminate, and that Prince, someone whose music my father has a deep emotional connection to due to association with the death of his father, is a part of this conspiracy. This would result in him digging himself deeper into the sand on this conspiracy, which would not be a benefit for either of us, as it would make it harder for me to exist as myself in our household, and it would also work to invalidate a lot of the things that made my father's life easier around the time that my grandfather passed away. This was a significant gamble for both of us. My father chose position A. Thank fucking God. This does, however, speak to a level of extreme cognitive dissonance that comes with being queerphobic, and in particular, black and queerphobic. In my experience, and in the experience of a lot of other black people I have as friends, our families can be extremely homophobic in one sentence, and in the next talk about how they enjoy music from insert person here who is literally what they would consider to be a walking queer stereotype. And next, they'll shit on openly gay people, or who they deem gay, usually which takes the form of a black man who dresses in a slightly effeminate way, even though dress isn't indicative of someone's sexuality, but homophobes really don't give a fuck about that, to legitimately defending Michael Jackson from allegations against him in the next breath, gossiping about how the Hollywood elite or some shit set him up to be an alleged pedophile. Alleged pedophile. The same people who are in full support of DaBaby's shitty statements about gay people, and those who think that Lil Nas X is an industry plant by the white man who turned black men into effeminate people, are the same who will proudly bump Frank Ocean. Listen to Frank Ocean, by the way. His shit fucking slaps. The same people who will call people all types of slurs and queers will openly engage with Tyler, the Creator's music. You know, Tyler, the Creator. The guy who rapped this line. And whose entire album, Igor, was about an unreciprocated queer love he had. For fuck's sake, at least pay attention to the fucking media you consume. Have a level of fucking consistency. If you're gonna be a fucking shithead, you can at least be fucking consistent. Anyways, this inconsistency in queerphobia is largely birthed from the fact that a lot of hatred of queer people is just an extremely irrational, knee-jerk reaction to something that is just, the fallacy intended, natural. To love another person is just what humans do and have done for as long as we've walked the face of this planet. And to lampoon someone else for who they love because, what, they have the same parts, or what they dress as is not what you have as a standard is ridiculous. And a lot of it seems to be birthed out of and propagated by a level of religious fundamentalism and cherry picking of Bible quotes, which may even be inaccurately translated. The difficult part about this is that these viewpoints are largely baked in from birth and are taken as simple fact by those who believe it from birth. Older generations pass on this queerphobia to their children, and then their children to their grandchildren, and then so on and so forth. It is only with the advent and the supersonic spread of the internet that counter-narratives to typically religion-filled queerphobia and other forms of discrimination in general have had any major challenge. But despite this fact, however, even the monolith that is the ill-defined traditional family values, there have always been exceptions that were casually stepped over and ignored. One that I presented when I brought up Prince in that conversation with my father. This queerphobia, like all other forms of discrimination, is really fucking inconsistent. Just as racists may have a black friend, or a sexist may have a wife and a daughter, people are willing to ignore their discrimination against people of other groups in favor of people who are a part of those groups who they like. Although that discrimination does bleed into those interpersonal relationships with people they like, but that's a topic for another time. As displayed earlier, these exceptions can even exist for people like music artists, like Prince and Michael Jackson. And being able to call out these exceptions that people already have for figures that would, if presented nowadays, be lampooned by the same people that hate figures like Lil Nas X or Russell Westbrook. There is a function to bringing attention to the cognitive dissonance that a lot of these people hold. This forces them to either give up this figure that they respect or recognize a contradiction in their beliefs. I call this function Montero's Gamble, or Pillow's Gauge, not trademarked. Yet. Whichever one you want to go with. It is a gamble in that this can serve to either make someone recognize their cognitive dissonance and work to get rid of it by becoming more accepting, or have them get rid of their cognitive dissonance by actively rejecting these figures that they hold dear, causing them to move further into hatred and conspiracy. It is a gauge in that this can serve to see where these people are in terms of their hatred, and exactly how committed they are to it. If they reject the figure that they once liked and move in further into hatred, it's going to be a lot more difficult to convince this person out of their position. And, if being honest, it might not even be worth it or safe to try to do so. However, if they acknowledge this dissonance, or even try to work to preserve their contradictory opinions of whatever figure they hold dear, this shows that they might be salvageable. Anyone who has had any experience moving out of any hateful beliefs can recognize that, whilst witnessing cognitive dissonance on the outside looking in can be mind-numbingly fucking painful, the acknowledgement of cognitive dissonance can be integral to moving away from hatred, which will be addressed further in the next part now. As I said earlier, the difficult part about challenging queerphobic viewpoints is that they are largely baked in from birth, are hyper-irrational, and are typically tied to extremely personal religious belief. These are beliefs that are held as objective facts in the minds of the people who have held them for decades on end, and, trust me, it feels really fucking impossible to move someone out of a completely different view on what is actually reality. As these people pass on their beliefs to their children, they're pushing these beliefs to spread and fester deep in the minds of people who come in contact with them. Only with the advent of the internet have we seen narratives of queer rights shift as dramatically as they have since the 90s, with positive viewpoints and narratives now being able to spread to countless people through the internet, allowing for social conditioning propagated against queer rights and queer existence to have meaningful challenges for the first times in history. But that doesn't mean that there still aren't issues. As this conditioning is challenged, there are going to be people out crying in order to preserve their bigotry, and as society has progressed, their messaging has shifted from being gay's sin to the Hollywood elite are orchestrating a massive plot to make black men effeminate, the second kind of rhetoric being far more hooking than the initial sin argument. One argument encourages discontentedness and passive resentment in those who believe it. The other, however, makes the believer feel directly attacked. This makes people who buy into these crazy-ass conspiracies far more defensive, and defensiveness is a more potent emotion than just passive hatred. Although the new messaging is a lot more extreme than before, it is indicative that the old arguments aren't working as well as they used to. Society is moving forward, whether queerphobes like it or not. To move past hatred is a process that is long, difficult, and painful, and one that is a very personal experience, so I won't speak for anyone else, but if I had to give any advice, it would be this. To preface, guiding someone past this hatred and bigotry, you have to keep in mind that you can't force them to drop these viewpoints on day one of being challenged. What you can do, however, is shift them in the right direction and give them tools to deal with their own hatred. Here are some tips you may be able to use, just some things that helped me break out of my own hateful viewpoints earlier in my life. 1. As stated earlier, recognizing contradictions. When I was a bigoted person, part of me moving away from that bigotry was me realizing that my beliefs didn't line up with who I was as a person. My bigotry against non-binary people, for example, came directly into contact with my own long-standing struggles with my own gender identity, and I eventually came to terms with the fact that my beliefs were contradictory, and so I moved out of my bigoted beliefs. Being able to recognize contradictions within your own beliefs is an important step to actually changing those beliefs. After that, we have the next one. 2. Point out to these people with hateful beliefs that the people instilling said beliefs in them are idiots. They won't want to associate with these people if they acknowledge that these people are stupid, because no one wants to be stupid by proxy. For example, point out that Ben Shapiro isn't some ultra debate god, unchallenged and unbeaten by those stupid liberals, like his followers tout him to be, but a 37-year-old loser man who failed out of Hollywood and chooses to use his skills that might be useful elsewhere, as a Harvard-trained lawyer and all, to yell at a bunch of 19-year-old undergraduates at college campuses, fails to understand functions of the reproductive system, and who got so triggered at a BBC conservative pundit when slightly challenged on his beliefs that he walked off the show like a fucking trust fund toddler. In my case with my father, instead of acting like Tariq Nasheed is some freedom fighter for black people, speaking truth to power in the establishment as Nasheed sells himself as, I have to point out that all Nasheed amounts to is a man who appears to be grievously devastated by the fact that his rap career never took off in any meaningful sense. And when you Google the name K-Flex, his rap name, the first thing that comes up isn't him, but a search page full of air conditioning piping from a company in Youngsville, North Carolina. Tariq now having to rely on rabid rants about gay people and calling other black people that disagree with his insane ass racial slurs in order to make money. You know, like the Candace Owens-like alleged grifter he, in my humble opinion, is. And Tariq, if you're somehow watching this, why are you so obsessed with gay people? Makes you wonder. Anyways, my third and final tip. 3. Don't be aggressive. Acknowledging your own cognitive dissonance can be a very rude awakening for a lot of people, and realizing the figures that you respect and follow are fucking stupid is not an environment that is necessarily suitable for good emotions. Having your very view of not just your opinion, but what you consider to be your reality, even though your reality is very personal and factually incorrect in the case of homophobes, having that challenged can make someone hyper-defensive. Hell, I experienced a portion of this hyper-defensiveness in the car story I told earlier. As such, you have to remain calm. If you approach someone going through the throes of reckoning with their shite viewpoints, with the aggression of Hannibal crossing the Alps, with fucking war elephants, you are unlikely to achieve any progress because you'll only be pushing your subject into further defensiveness. Staying calm will make them feel like shit for lashing out at you, if they do, which could make them more amicable to your talking points. And it'll also make your talking points seem more reasonable because of your collected demeanor. Those who are calm have nothing to lose, at least in the viewpoints of someone whose shitty viewpoints are being challenged. At the end of the day, however, you can only expect people to move out of these hateful beliefs in their own time, though. All you can do is give guidance to those who you wish to see break out of these beliefs, but have it be known. Do not try to break people out of these beliefs if it is dangerous for you to make an attempt to. Do not ever put yourself at risk. As much as it might hurt to watch someone you love fall into hatred and bigotry, especially bigotry against groups that you yourself are a part of, that is the last thing that you want. You do not want their hatred to be targeted directly at you as an individual. Queerphobia in the black community, and in humanity in general, has been a constant in societies for thousands of years. But just like displayed earlier, these trends in queerphobia have been decreasing over the past few decades, including within the black community. I'll say it now. My primary purpose for writing this video is partially to vent about my own experiences dealing with queerphobia as a closeted kid in the black family and in a black community. But I also made this to bring attention to a facet of the black experience that many leftist content creators rarely bring up, or at least rarely bring up outside of a brief mention to prove a larger point. It's important to acknowledge that whilst the black community is plagued by a myriad of issues birthed from white supremacist power struggles, there are still issues within the community that are relatively interpersonal. And our queerphobia is a notable example of that. With that being said, thank you for watching through this entire video. Like I said earlier, I do have plans to continue content creation, so if you want, follow me on Twitter right here, and sub to my channel or like my video right here. Share if you want, do what you do, and hopefully I will see you in 2 weeks, hopefully, with a much lighter topic. This is an end note to the video. I would like to say again, thank you for watching. If you heard any improprieties in my sound or me, buffing some fucking lines and not fixing them, that's mostly because I'm recording in a closet. It is currently 3:31 a.m. And I am high-key trying not to re-record these lines because this isn't necessarily a very good environment for me to be recording my lines, and I'm technically not even supposed to be in this closet right now. I'm really supposed to be in bed doing my own shit, not in the office next to my room. But, that's really besides the point. I really do appreciate it if you have watched a video somehow all the way through, and stick with it. Stick with me if you can, because next video, Working Register 1, hopefully it will be funny as fuck. Once again, this is a pillow. Thank you for watching.